The Dallas Cowboys are conducting a second interview with Brian Schottenheimer. Could that indicate that a rebuild year is coming? We'll break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are going to answer your mailbag questions. But Landon, first, we got some news right before we jumped on the podcast that the Cowboys will be conducting a second interview with Brian Schottenheimer. They finished their first one up last night. They're doing it again on Wednesday. It feels like the fan base is not a fan of this move, and they're turning on the front office a little bit. So where do you stand now that it seems like Brian Schottenheimer is a legitimate candidate?
I mean, I'm certainly not thrilled. It's certainly not like feeling like he is, anywhere near my top candidate or even someone I even considered to be a candidate. I think that, the process of him being interviewed has kind of made me, evaluate that in a way that I didn't even evaluate it before. Like I didn't even consider him a candidate. So I didn't really consider what it would be like to have Schottenheimer as the head coach. There's a lot here, right? Like, and I think I kind of laid some of it out last night on Twitter and Blue Sky, but I think for me, the big thing here is that I actually think that Schottenheimer could be a decent head coach at some point. I think he has the temperament and the kind of, the elements that you need as a head coach, as a personality to be a head coach. I think the issue has been and it continues to be that I just really, really do not want Schottenheimer calling the plays. And I think that I could have been convinced that, okay, you're bringing in Schottenheimer, maybe you bring in a strong offensive and defense coordinator, and maybe you can kind of roll with that, or maybe that's a stopgap solution for, another solution down the road or something. But the idea of bringing Schottenheimer in to be the head coach and the play caller, and that's the thing that kind of has come out since yesterday too, is that I think it was Jane Slater reported
pulling up the tweet right now. Yep.
It's that wherever Schottenheimer goes next, which I mean, I haven't seen any other interviews for any other spots that he's been interviewing for. Wherever Schottenheimer goes next, the key element is that he wants to call plays.
She said it's imperative that wherever he goes, he calls plays at his next stop.
I mean, it's also not imperative that he has a next stop. I could throw that out there. I think it's, it's just frustrating because, again, it feels kind of misaligned. Like, I think you had a very kind of interesting theory here that I think I'm kind of working my way into a little bit. Talk to him a little bit about what you think this hire would actually be saying about the Cowboys.
Well, are we talking about Kellen Moore? Or are we just talking about in general?
No, I think we're talking about a potential rebuild,
okay. Well, yes. Do we think that I'll get to the rebuild. Do we think if they hire Brian Schottenheimer, it means that Kellen Moore said no? Because I have a hard time believing, for as much as Jerry Jones talks about how smart Kellen Moore is and how he thinks he's going to be a great head coach, that they would hire Schottenheimer over Kellen Moore. Would you agree?
Yeah, I tend to think so. Like if all things being equal and Kellen Moore was interested in the job, that I would think that Kellen would probably be the priority there over Schottenheimer.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So to talk about the rebuild, this was a question from Fernando. He said, could you see this potential hire as an indication of team rebuilding, maybe 2 to 3 years of cleaning up the cap, gathering young players, and then maybe doing a further or, a more comprehensive coaching search once that has happened? Maybe. We've seen other franchises do this in the past. The Texans did it with David Culley and Lovie Smith. We've seen Jacksonville did it a couple different times where you have basically like it's not an interim head coach, but a coach that is not long-term for the plan, come in and just be the stopgap option until you get your books in order. Unfortunately, I think the Cowboys do need to do that, but it's really hard to do it when your quarterback's the highest paid quarterback in the league. You've got the second highest paid receiver in the league. And oh, by the way, you're going to make Micah Parsons the highest paid defensive player in the NFL this offseason. You can't really rebuild when you have those 3 contracts on your books.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a lot of what this theory is suggesting does make some sense, except for the big glaring thing of what we just mentioned, that they just signed Dak to this long-term, this 3 or 4 year deal now. They just signed CeeDee Lamb. They're gonna sign Micah this offseason. It doesn't make a ton of sense to sign those contracts and then to kind of launch directly into a rebuild at that point, and then be finishing up right as those contracts are finishing up, finishing the rebuild right as those contracts are finishing up.
There's also another contract that the Cowboys could try to get done this offseason, which we know they won't. Like, look at the guard market, how it exploded last offseason. I wouldn't wait around trying to sign Tyler Smith before he puts together another Pro Bowl season, but unfortunately, I don't envision Tyler Smith getting a contract this offseason, which is just going to delay that part of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we're trying to claw for answers here, right? We're trying to reverse engineer this thing into making some sense when it just isn't making sense right now. I tend, when situations like this pop up, I tend to think that we're missing information here, right? Like that there's a key piece of information that we're not getting. And maybe we'll get it once a head coaching announcement is made. Like maybe they make the announcement with Schotty, and then they announce some coordinators that make this kind of all fall into place. But I just, it's hard for me to believe, or maybe it's what you said. Maybe they are desperate. Maybe Kellen Moore did say no to them or something, and they're just down to their last viable candidate, and they're so desperate to create continuity on the offense that they're willing to look past the long-term health of the team and or the offense, frankly, and put Schottenheimer in there to kind of just give them something familiar to call in 2025.
I do think there's a chance that Dak has a part of this, and I want to get to that in segment 2, but I think that maybe they just want to keep as much continuity as possible for at least one more year, and then when they have some more options next year because of the cap space, maybe they're going to be more flexible, and maybe they'll have other candidates that are more open to taking this job. But Landon, let's say they do announce Brian Schottenheimer as the head coach on Monday, whatever. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be really disappointed in the fact that the Cowboys did not have a more comprehensive coaching search. That's what I said from the very beginning, is like, I wanted them to interview lots of different names from lots of different backgrounds. If your interviews are Robert Saleh and Leslie Frazier, 2 candidates that satisfied the Rooney Rule, Kellen Moore, your former offensive coordinator, and then Brian Schottenheimer, your current offensive coordinator, and that's the entire list of guys that you brought in, I don't know how you can say that's good business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I also think it's fair to say that there's not a ton of great candidates out there right now. And maybe that's part of the reason that they want to kind of find a stopgap solution is, outside of Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, like Liam Cohen only took a couple interviews and then he decided just to straight go back to Tampa Bay. I just haven't seen some of the names that I actually wanted to see get interviewed be interviewed, Oh. So I don't think it's just the Cowboys at this point. I think the Bears and the Jaguars were very much in play in the Ben Johnson situation. And then that's it. Right. The Jets didn't really seem to be kicking the tires too much in that situation. The Jets seemed pretty laser locked on Aaron Glenn, which made sense. He played there for a long time and there's some connection there. I do agree with you that I think the Cowboys have done a half-hearted coaching search without a doubt. There's zero doubt about that. But I mean, again, I would also point out and argue that this isn't exactly a great crop of available, head coaches to kind of come in and inspire you to move heaven and earth to get a new head coach and a new system in here. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's disappointing to say the least. And the Cowboys have not helped themselves by, spreading their wings a little bit, throwing the net out a little bit wider. But at the same time, there's not a ton of fish out there either.
I do wonder, you went into the 2024 season with a lame duck head coach. I would have assumed that they would have had just more names that they would want to interview. But that hasn't been the case so far. And again, this is not done by any stretch. Maybe there's a chance that you're listening to this podcast and it is done.
Yeah.
I doubt it. But there is a possibility that, hey, the Commanders get eliminated this week, and now you're talking to Cliff Kingsbury, Landon's guy right there. I don't know if that would make you feel any better, but there is a chance that we just see more interviews over the next week or so. And if that happens, we will fill you in. All right, Landon, I want to talk about Dak Prescott and whether this is a make or break season for him. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That is $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and they have a variety of bets that keeps every game exciting. And now that we're inching closer and closer to the Super Bowl, we have even more bets that you can take a chance on over on FanDuel. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some excitement to the playoffs. FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Landon, let's get to some more questions. We had a question regarding Dak Prescott, basically to the effect of, hey, if Dak continues to struggle with injuries, is there a chance that Dallas moves on after the 2025 season? I know that he's going into year one of his new deal, but we are getting to a point with Dak where I feel like we're going into the 2014, 2015 version of Tony Romo, where you're worried anytime he gets hit about it potentially being a long-term injury.
Yeah, listen. Cowboys fans may not want to have this conversation, but I think it's part of it that needs to happen is that there has been a lot of kind of anger reserved for the Cowboys and the way they handled this situation, but not enough for Dak's involvement in some of this stuff, right? And if you get another situation where Dak's healthy and the offense kind of performs the way it did the beginning of the season next year, absolutely, it's time to start having a conversation about that. And look, again, I said this at the end of the Packers game. I keep pointing back to the Packers game, but I just think it's such an inflection point for this franchise, right? That a lot of things need to change. If you want to kind of find a way to break through, a lot of things need to change. And we've talked about it this offseason. I think that the Cowboys, instead of going out and doing a coaching search for the coach that would make Dak the most comfortable, I think that they needed to kind of go out and find an offensive coordinator that would push Dak and take him out of his comfort zone a little bit. Because if you're trying to break through a little bit, and try to find a way to get around a roadblock that you keep running into, more familiarity is not the best way to solve that problem. And so I do think that everything, needs to be evaluated, and that includes Dak Prescott. And I think he's been giving a lot of leeway because I do think that he is near the bottom of the list of problems here, right? And I'm certainly not trying to put this on him by any stretch of the imagination. However, he's also largely avoided, at the Fox, national level maybe, or ESPN national level, Dak Prescott gets talked a lot about because, that's the way the Cowboys get treated. But locally, Dak has been treated as it's not his fault. It's everybody but Dak's fault. At a certain point, we have to realize that Dak is entwined in this situation, and he brings a lot of the good, but there's also some negative. And as he gets older and he becomes more and more, injury prone, I guess, right? Just because I think he's physically getting older. I think the question then becomes is this something that you want to continue to kind of do beyond this contract, right? Like
Yep.
if we go through another year or two of this where you feel like you've given Dak enough to kind of at least have the offense operate functionally, and it still isn't working, I think you have to expand where you're looking for issues into the quarterback and some of the other spots. So yeah, I think it's at a certain point you've got to see Dak kind of get back into form in order to have faith that he will get back into form,
Yep.
right?
I think there are candidates out there that could really help Dak continue to post the numbers that we saw in 2023 when Dak was an MVP candidate. Like I do think adding Kellen Moore would probably make sure that Dak continues to put up a really strong statistical season. But what I would like to see is the Cowboys hire the right coach that can make the offense better for January and February. And I think I'll give you an example. One of the things that I would like to see Dallas do more of is play from under center. And I know if playing from under center isn't as easy for quarterbacks because they don't get to scan the whole defense compared to shotgun. We actually saw the Cowboys in the second half of the year with Cooper Rush play more under center, and that's when the run game started to get better. And one of the reasons for that is now a running back can actually run downhill compared to when they're playing in shotgun, and it's just a lot harder for those guys to get some speed. But I know that Dak doesn't love playing playing under center because he's not the same athlete he was when he was in 2016, 2017, 2018. And it takes more effort to run some of the stretch zone plays. And you'd have to turn your back to the defense on some of that play action stuff. I do think some of that stuff that Dak maybe, I don't want to say is opposed to, but just hasn't been doing a lot of over the last couple of years would be beneficial to the offense.
Yeah. Again, I think, we kind of continue to trend towards Dak's preferences because we think, oh, we're supporting our quarterback, we're supporting the player on our team. Like that's going to get the best results out of him. And I don't know that we've proven that to be true. I think if anything, we've shown that some of the most successful Dak Prescott has been Dak Prescott when he's had to do some things that weren't necessarily his preference, right? So,
and we see this across the league. Like I look at like Joe Brady with the Bills. I mean, Josh Allen was an MVP candidate the last couple years playing in Ken Dorsey's offense where he was in shotgun all the time. Now they put him under center, and Buffalo's running the ball as well as any team in the league. That's not to say that Josh Allen is never in shotgun because he is a lot, but way more than what we've seen over the last couple of years. I do think the Cowboys need to find a coach that can give Dak some hard coaching, not be overly critical, but say, hey, we need to do this because it's the best for our team, not necessarily your stats or whatever. I do think that would help. And I do wonder, Landon, like if he has another bad season and they are accommodating for him, right? Now we're into a weird spot with Dak where his contract becomes a major issue.
Yeah, and suddenly he's got all the control and he's part of the problem. And if you can't fix that, then you're basically just writing it out. So, which is again what happens when you sign quarterbacks to big time contracts. It's like sometimes by the end of it, they aren't the same player, and you're paying a lot of money for not what you originally paid for it, which doesn't make it not worth it. It's just the reality of what happens sometimes in the situation. So I do think the Cowboys need to keep an eye on it. And at a certain point, like I do think that they should look at it and go, look, we've done everything we can to be accommodating to what Dak thinks he likes. Maybe we still need to try some different things. Maybe we need to kind of press that issue, make him a little bit uncomfortable in a way that is going to have him try new things. And maybe that's the way that you break through.
Last thing before we move on. One of the reasons why I think a Brian Schottenheimer interview would be really interesting to me is I would love to talk to Schotty about like what happened those final 3 years with Russell Wilson in Seattle. Because if you remember the arguments during that stretch, it was let Russ cook. Schottenheimer's not letting Russ cook. Way too much runs, way too much under center. Let him be the guy that drops back and throws the ball 35, 40 times. Seattle could really run the ball those years, but their passing offense was kind of and everybody thought Russell was a great quarterback. We've seen actually since Russell has left, him try to become that guy with Sean Payton and with Nathaniel Hackett and now with the Steelers, and his play has got dramatically worse. Maybe he was right in that sense, Or maybe Russell Wilson just got really old and that's why his play dropped off. But I think those are like some of the things I would want to know from Schottenheimer. Like, hey, why did you do this to Russ? Would you think could you do some of the same stuff with Dak? Would it work? I don't know.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of that on social media too. Of just like, this is the guy that, Schottenheimer is the guy that we had to admit let Russ cook for. And I'm like, guys, have you guys checked in on that Russell Wilson situation these last few years? Because it seems like the last two offensive coordinators have tried to let him cook a little bit. And he
Last
looked
three.
cooked.
Actually,
Yeah.
the last three offensive, whether it was Nathaniel Hackett, Russell Wilson, and now Arthur Smith, by the end of the season, they were all trying to rein him in because it wasn't working, letting him throw 30 times a game.
Yeah, so I do think that is kind of information that probably needs to be retroactively updated as far as the pros and cons on Schottenheimer's play calling. However, like, I still feel like Schotty is an old ball coach. I know who his dad is, and like I think that this is a situation that has been ingrained into him for a long time. He's been a offensive coordinator for almost 20 years in the NFL. This isn't like some new guy. Like, he believes in the old ways, and not that that's a problem. It's just, it's not don't expect that we're going to get like some kind of new, modern thinking offensive coordinator. This is a lot more of the same, which I think is the draw for the Cowboys, but not necessarily for the Cowboys fandom.
All right, let's talk some cut candidates because we're getting closer and closer to the new league year. Who are some players that could be on their way out in Dallas? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage stress, improve your sleep, and help you communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into your busy schedule can be a challenge. But that is where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there is a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener of the Locked On Cowboy podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support of the show. That is Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Landon, our final question here is from Chris. He wants to know, can you give us some potential cut candidates this offseason for the Cowboys?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of free agents that are coming out. I mean, I guess we're looping in guys whose contracts have expired that the Cowboys are not
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, like, just to kind of start at the top, DeMarcus Lawrence, Brandon Cooks, Zach Martin,
Also,
Jordan Lewis,
yep.
Oso Digizua, Golston, are all Rico Dowdle is an unrestricted free agent as well. These are all the people I've just listed are folks whose contracts have expired or are unrestricted free agents. I think all of those are names that are, have the potential to leave. I think to be honest, right now it's all on the table. I have no idea. Like, we don't even know who our defensive coordinator is right now.
Nope.
We don't know who our head coach is right now. So it's hard to kind of parse who's going to be wanted and not wanted, but let's go under the assumption for right now that it's either a Schottenheimer or a Kellen Moore hire. Okay. Yeah. And that we're bringing back the offense, and then we're going to bring in a familiar defensive coordinator. Right. I would say that of those names that you listed, Zach Martin, DeMarcus Lawrence, Brandon Cooks, Jordan Lewis, Oso Digizua, and I think Rico Dowdle probably is thrown in there as well. Of those names, you maybe could expect to bring back like 2 of those guys.
I think 2 is the max, right?
Yeah. And I would say that probably the cheapest ones, right? Like Rico Dowdle and
See, the thing is,
maybe Jordan Lewis, depending on what his number is, right?
I would like to believe that they're going to bring back Osa, because I just don't know how you replace that guy in free agency or the draft. But he's also going to, of the names you mentioned, he's going to be the most expensive by long shot, right? I mean, by a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, look, like this is it's not a great defensive tackle free agent market, from what I understand. He's I'm pretty sure the crown jewel of it.
It's him and Milton Williams from the Eagles are the top 2.
Oh, yeah, I forgot Milton Williams.
Yeah.
He's going to be another guy who's going to command a ton of money.
Yeah.
And for what we've already heard a couple teams that are interested in kind of kicking it around, and I haven't heard the Commander's name used yet. I don't know if they have interest there, but they do have a ton of money, and obviously Dan Quinn is there. They also have a lot of defensive tackles, so maybe they're.
Yeah, I bet you they're more interested in Jordan Lewis.
Probably.
And you saw Jordan Lewis talking about Dan Quinn this week on Twitter. I think he likes him. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very likely that you could lose all these guys. I think that Dowdle
should they?
They should not.
I mean, if the idea is that do you think this team is a Super Bowl caliber contender in 2025?
I think a lot of things would have to go right.
So then maybe the idea is that you do let all of these guys go, except for maybe one that you feel like is irreplaceable.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad that honestly, of these guys, like, it's too bad that Golston has played himself into probably a big
Stephen Jones said the same thing and said it sucks for us.
Yeah, it does, because Golston to me is the guy that you feel like if you re-signed him, it doesn't really matter what defensive coordinator comes in, you're going to be able to find a place for Golston, right? And it also feels like this was the year that he started to kind of truly put it all together a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I think if I had to choose one, he makes the most sense, just because I think he's, coach agnostic to a large degree. I also think that Rico Dowdle, like, no matter what offense you're playing, he doesn't have to be your starting running back. But he would be a valuable guy that you could give a ton of carries to and feel good about.
I just don't know. So Dallas last year, they said it was too much to pay Zach Moss 2 years, $8 million. I think Rico is better than Zach Moss, but I don't know if Dallas is going to feel comfortable giving him $4 million a year.
Well, the running back market's going to be crazy this year, and I don't mean crazy like wildly expensive. Like, I have no idea what it's going to look like. Right?
Got no. Well, there's so many good running backs coming up in this draft. I think teams are going to be.
Thing.
Yeah,
and there's so many good draftable running backs, and there's not a ton of great free agent running backs, right? So, like, the market may be really wonky. So you may be able to get Rico for a song, to be honest.
Well, and I know these running backs, it might be like musical chairs a little bit, where if you don't sign early and maybe it's 90% of what you think your market value is, you just might not end up with a job. And this is what happened to a couple of these running backs in 2022 and 2023. They waited and waited and waited, and all of a sudden it's July and nobody has a running back need yet. So that's possible. I want to talk about some cut candidates really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And the one name that just stands out is Terrence Steele. The Cowboys could save quite a bit of money if they decided to cut Terrence Steele. Now, the issue is you've got 2 tackle spots that are up in the air, but if you feel like maybe Tyler Guyton would be a better fit on the right side and Awesome Richards could be your left tackle, maybe that is something that you would explore.
I mean, I think what you can probably tell yourself is that you can get the minimum, like, worst case scenario, you let Steele go and you manage to navigate your way, like you have last year's running back situation happen to you, right?
Yeah.
Where, oops, we forgot to draft the tackle in the draft, and we can't find anybody in free agency until last minute. I think worst case scenario there is that at least you have your Rico Dowdle in house with Awesome Richards as your left tackle, and Guyton potentially playing right tackle if you needed him to, and that would be maybe super safe the fallback plan, but it would be a fallback plan, right?
Yeah.
But I also tend to think that if you did that, you're going to be able to find some people in the draft potentially to replace him. So yeah, it's a difficult needle to thread, but maybe it also helps you cut Steele. Maybe it helps you sign that extra guy that you wanted to retain
let me
from
give
that
you a
other
name.
list, right?
So they could cut Terrence Steele and save immediately $9 million in this year's cap. I think Golston would probably go for less than $9 million, but like, would you cut Terrence Steele to sign Golston and let's say Rico?
I mean, I think that, yeah. And then like the idea being that you could draft a tackle in the first round if you wanted to. I mean, I think that there's probably a couple guys you could take in the first round if you as well, or a guard or something like that.
Let me give you another option, right? What if, again, now we're really getting into the weeds, but what if you cut Steele, you move Tyler Smith out to left tackle, you move Guyton to right tackle, you keep Awesome Richards as your swing guy. Hoffman's one of your starting guards. Bass is a placeholder, and you just try to find one starting offensive lineman at some point in the draft. Not necessarily round one. We're not saying you need to draft a guard in round one, but like,
there's a tackle from Missouri who's maybe not tall enough to be a tackle for every team, but man, I'll take him as my guard tackle, and then you can swing him in and out as needed. So yeah, there are ways to do this for sure, if you need to, and I do think that Steele is a guy whose number is kind of a blinking red light, especially like I said, with all these kind of free agents walking out the door. If you want to kind of pull one or two of these guys back, it may make some sense to kind of get rid of that number on Steele.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to break down the Cowboys hiring Brian Schottenheimer as their next head coach. Maybe. We'll see. Layden's rolling his eyes, but that's okay. They follow Layden on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.